Chapter 27. As it happened, Ray had met her ex-boyfriend in this very bespoken bar. She really should have known better. He was called Nathaniel, and, in hindsight, this oddly biblical name was a dead giveaway. They'd spent a couple of evenings in their respective bespoken bars, chatting over beers, comparing blues trivia, nodding along to the lusty drive of John Lee Hooker or Howling Wolf, enjoying each other's company, flirting, tentatively at first, then more overtly. He'd flown into town. There'd been Turkish food and screaming Jay Hawkins and drinks, and later a hot-blooded argument over some poorly communicated philosophy or other. Drunk and outraged, they'd turned their backs on one another in an alleyway, ready to march home alone, whiskey stubborn and offended. Ray couldn't remember who'd softened first, but there'd been a reunion of sorts, at least enough of a reconciliation to allow their 40% proof anger to rush on into sexual hunger. And so, drunk and dehydrated, they'd finally feasted on each other, hair clutched and clothes torn, two bodies biting and grappling in the night, eventually satisfied. And this was how it had been for a few months. Whenever he was in town, they'd hook up, get drunk, then test at each other's boundaries, prodding and poking at topics that they thought were worth defending. All that venom and frustration was a powerful aphrodisiac. They disagreed about movies and music, morals and ethics, economics and ecology. They disagreed in restaurants and bars, in cinemas and theatres, in the streets and in her kitchen. The more explosive the argument, the more passionate their rapprochement. And so, by the tired and rage-weary light of dawn, they appeased each other sweetly and earnestly, mollifying one another with warm, contradictory kisses. The whole thing was utterly exhausting. Late one night, while Ray lay dumb in post-orgasmic recuperation, sex silly and brain-dead, Nathaniel had told her about his faith. It hadn't registered as clearly as it should have. They'd drunk a lot of wine and got into an argument about the bioethics of colonising other planets. Tempers had flared, doors were slammed, and after some sharp insults, he'd walked out. 5 minutes later, they'd messaged and made up. He strode purposefully back into her apartment, and, as always, they'd fuck for hours. So, there she was, curled up in bed, sheets and pillows, arms and legs entangled, when he murmured something in the dark, lazily revealing his neo-Baha'ist faith. Nathaniel nuzzled into her rump, and she pressed back into him. Half asleep, she'd thought he'd said neo-Buddhist, and drifted off, picturing him in an orange robe with a shaved head, cross-legged and meditative. The next day he'd corrected her misunderstanding and told her a little more about his faith. Neo-Bahaists believed that although humanity was equal before God, they weren't interested in actually achieving this equality. In fact, they didn't think it was possible. What they held holy was not the destination, but the journey itself. So, they celebrated their perceived differences. They found God's glory in their conflicts, as long as they had a go at resolving them. It was the process that mattered to them, the perpetual wrestling with the contradiction that everything in God's creation was interconnected, but at the same time, totally at odds. And this, Nathaniel said, was why he was with her. He relished their arguments. They were an opportunity to continue his spiritual development. It was a chance to struggle in divine frustration and confusion. And the two of them had so much to disagree about. Driving her home, he told her how he found her opinions laughable. He thought she was a joke. Ray was, quite simply, the perfect partner. The problem with most girls was that they were so agreeable. There were so many smart, well-rounded, affable types. Thank God Ray was different. He just couldn't see how they'd ever get along together, and it was this kind of long-term friction he was looking for in a girl. Excitedly, he tapped a few commands into his eyeline and projected a list onto the wall, informing her that ever since they'd first met, he'd kept a track of all the different things he'd found irritating and objectionable about her. It was a long list, and once he'd got to the bottom of the first screen, he'd scrolled down and carefully presented each item on the following 6. This was not how Ray had seen things panning out. They'd spent 20 minutes parked outside her apartment block while Nathaniel finished his personal critique. When he was done, she let herself out, turned calmly, and told him that their relationship was over and that she never wanted to see him again. He'd nodded, sympathetically, piously accepting her struggle, interpreting her rejection as an important step towards God's disharmonious love. She thought about trying to correct him. She wanted to tell him they really were over, that there was no chance of them struggling on together with anything. But she chose to just close the door and walk away instead. And that was the last time I saw him. Ray swilled the last of her beer around the bottom of her glass. "You're best off out of that," said Perdita. "Good riddance, I say." "Yeah, well, I wish I were rid of him. The bloody maniac sees our separation as evidence of our perfect incompatibility. He says he's going to continue grappling with our holy misalliance for the rest of his life. Sends me messages to check if I'll join him. Here, I got this one last week." Ray tapped her eyeline, and Nathaniel's floating head sprang up before them. "Hi, Ray. Listen, I haven't got long. I've got a meeting in a minute, but I thought I'd drop you a quick line. I saw something today that reminded me of you. I was in the park, and there were these dogs kind of fucking, but also kind of fighting. Just like you. So vicious, but so up for it. God bless your shitty moods and your bad temper, Ray. And God bless your oh-so-predictable desire to rut at the end of the night in a sad attempt to ward off your loneliness. So, if you want to explore this further, you know where to find me. Let me know how much you hate me. My door is always open. Best be off. Meeting's about to start. Bit disappointing not to share this more directly with you. Again, you never bloody answer, do you? Hope you have a shit day. Really, I mean that. God bless." Ray shut the projection down, turned to Perdita, and invited comment with an eyebrow. "Quite the charmer." Perdita shook her head. "But don't let him put you off the entire sex. They're not all that fucked up. Or, well, I don't know, maybe they are. Perhaps the trick is to find someone who is fucked up in a way you can handle." She looked sternly at Ray. "But not this guy. Definitely not this guy." Sweet-toothed Baby Jones was calling up his soul and singing it forth like it was the end of days. Dropping to one knee, he let his guitar do the talking while the band rolled out their relentless groove. "Take that singer," Perdita nodded at Sweet-tooth with admiration. I think we can agree that most likely he's a mess. Guaranteed. A total nightmare. But maybe he's messed up in a way that I get. Not my type. Really? Nah. Ray signalled the host drone for another beer. Big show-off. I mean, what is he wearing? And Ray looked with bemusement at the stage. Oh, that's odd. What are the chances? What? Perdita asked. Nothing. Just his thumb. She shook her head. It's kind of cloven or something. Perdita squinted into the stage lights, but she couldn't see Sweet Tooth's hands so clearly. Man, could he play guitar, though?